Revenge with Karen.
You're cute when you pretend to know things, Brandon smirked, flipping the presentation remote like it was a damn baton. But no one cares what you say, Nancy. The conference room went silent, except for the faint hum of the ceiling vent and the sound of Brandon's ego unzipping itself across the glossy oak table. 12 people, directors, VPs, 2 guys from legal, shifted uncomfortably in their ergonomic chairs, trying to pretend they hadn't just witnessed a professional throat slitting. Nancy sat frozen, her screen still casting the final slide. Risk exposure. Indemnity voids in License Group C. But that slide might as well have said kick me in Comic Sans. What stung wasn't just the humiliation. It was the knowing. She knew that Brandon hadn't read the acquisition protocol, hadn't understood the reclassification of legacy IP rights, and even skimmed the indemnity clause footnotes. Hell, the only thing he'd skimmed that morning was the froth off his oat milk latte. But he didn't need to know, because his daddy was CEO and Nancy was just the compliance ghost they kept around to check boxes. Not that she was surprised. She'd been at Marrow Tech for 7 years. Long enough to see 3 product lines rise and die, long enough to know that the more critical your insight, more likely someone like Brandon would trip over it on his way to a press shoot. But still getting gut-punched in front of the executive team over a flagged IP licensing issue that could tank the entire acquisition. It stung like battery acid behind her eyes. Somewhere in her peripheral vision, a woman from HR did that awkward half-smile thing, like she was watching a slow-motion fender bender, but didn't want to get subpoenaed. Someone cleared their throat. Someone else reached for a complimentary biscotti like it was a life raft. Brandon just kept talking, steamrolling the meeting forward. We're greenlit across the board, he chirped. We'll finalize numbers Friday. Unless anyone else wants to cry wolf again. Nobody moved. And Nancy sat still, notebook open, fingers tight around her pen like it was the last weapon left in a sinking ship. She didn't speak. Not then. Just clicked her pen shut, closed her folder, quietly pushed back her chair. The sound of her heels crossing that room could have been a funeral march. Hey, real quick. Before we go any further, if you're one of the 93% of folks who listen to stories like this and don't hit subscribe, maybe fix that. It helps the channel more than Brandon helped that IP clause. And yeah, dropping a like tells the team we're doing something right, especially on stories like this one, where every word has teeth. All right, again, by the time she reached her desk, the meeting notes had already been uploaded, sanitized, pre-chewed, and Brandon branded. Her name was mentioned once, misspelled. That night she stayed late, not to catch up, not to own her lane, but to watch. To track every edit made to the compliance folders, every document suddenly moved, renamed, or conveniently archived. Something was off. Something beyond Brandon's usual frat boy swagger. He was hiding something. If he thought she was going to sit quietly in her cube while he torched 7 years of diligence for vanity acquisition and daddy's praise, then Brandon had another thing coming. Because the only thing more dangerous than a woman you don't take seriously is one who's been forced to stop talking. The email subject line was almost poetic in its blandness. Realignment Opportunity Documentation Management. Translation: You're being buried alive. Nancy didn't reply. Need to? Her keycard access to the compliance floor was already revoked by lunch, and her desktop folder labeled Acquisition Risk Tracking had mysteriously vanished from the shared drive. In its place, a note from IT, per departmental restructuring, your access has been adjusted to reflect your new scope. Scope, what a pretty word for exile. Her new desk was 3 floors down, wedged between facilities and procurement. Overhead lights buzzed like old fluorescent teeth, and someone had left a half-eaten granola bar stuck to the underside of her new monitor. The guy across from her, Gary, apparently, wore Crocs with socks and microwaved tuna at 10:15 a.m. Her only project, migrating 10 years of digital files into a new archival platform that no one would ever search unless subpoenaed. Gone from risk mitigation on a $280 million acquisition to babysitting PDF timestamps. But Nancy wasn't stupid. This wasn't random. It was surgical. They wanted her out, but not fired. That would be too clean. No, this was the slow bleed. Strip her access. Kill her visibility. Keep her name on the org chart so they could point at it when legal asked why the compliance team was still involved. She didn't scream. Didn't rage. That wasn't her style. Instead, she logged in. She clicked quietly through file after file, and she noticed something that made her neck tighten. There were gaps. Version histories that used to run dozens of edits deep suddenly clipped at 3. Metadata wiped. Audit logs reset. One contract, specifically the licensing document she flagged in the meeting, was replaced with a newer version. Same title, same date, but the indemnity clause gone. She blinked, cross-checked it with her old personal notes. It wasn't a formatting change. Someone had scrubbed the record. Nancy leaned back in her chair. The room smelled faintly of disinfectant and despair. And suddenly she smiled, because now it wasn't just a hunch. Now it was a trail. By day, she did what was asked, migrated, tagged, labeled. But each night after 6 p.m., she got to work. She brought in her old brother printer from home, dug a lockbox out of her attic, started printing. Everything, every altered contract, every stripped-down version, every final copy that didn't match what she'd reviewed 2 weeks prior. She called it her just-in-case folder, just in case Brandon threw her under the bus, just in case the acquisition imploded, just in case someone someday finally gave a damn. By the end of the second week, she had 132 printed pages in her folder, carefully annotated, cross-referenced, sealed in waterproof sleeves. Brandon was busy doing victory laps upstairs, rehearsing investor calls and trying to look good in tailored suits his daddy paid for. Nancy was down in the basement with a red pen and a fireproof box, drawing battle lines in silence. She didn't need applause. She didn't need allies. She needed one thing, the truth in hard copy. Because when the house of cards falls, and it always falls, no one believes the person who just remembers what happened. They believe the one who has receipts. The email showed up at 9:47 p.m. on a Wednesday. Subject line: Legacy Doc Inquiry Marrow Tech, 2016 to 2019. Nancy stared at the sender. Janelle Eckhart, External Audit Lead, Calum Partners, the firm tasked with combing through every dusty corner of Marrow Tech's guts before the acquisition ink dried. Nancy hadn't seen that name in over 2 years. They'd met back during the Meridian merger audit, back when Janelle still carried a 3-inch binder under one arm and a mild caffeine addiction under the other. Quiet, sharp, and allergic to corporate small talk. Nancy had liked her immediately. Janelle's email was brief, as expected. Hi, Nancy. Following up on a handful of legacy license files that didn't port into the share base export. You confirm whether Marrow Tech retained archival backups of the 2017 to 18 Product Group C indemnity schedule, especially anything tied to pre-IPO transfer clauses. Nancy didn't reply immediately. She read the line twice, once more. Pre-IPO transfer clauses. Group C. The exact minefield Brandon had paved over like it was a pothole on his way to quarterly bonus land. Nancy opened her private drive, scanned through her redacted archive, removing any file headers that might trace back to her direct access. She couldn't be seen feeding anything internal, not yet, but there were ways. She bundled a handful of documents, each carefully anonymized. Mostly pre-launch summaries, indemnity schedule snapshots, and 2 historical comparisons, enough to raise an eyebrow without drawing a sword. She added a short note, attaching what I've got on my end. Licensing schema seems altered since 2019. Specifically Group C, feels like someone wanted the indemnity clause to vanish without the courtesy of a funeral. She hovered over send for half a second, then clicked, and that should have been the end. Some compliance banter between 2 overworked women who knew the difference between a footnote and a lawsuit. But 5 minutes later, her screen blinked with a reply. No subject, no signature, just one sentence. Noted. I'll take it from here. Nancy sat back in her chair. Her printer clicked quietly behind her, still churning out timestamp logs like a digital confessional booth. She didn't know what Janelle planned to do with it, didn't ask. But something in that reply felt different, like someone had just yanked the first loose thread on a very expensive suit. For the first time in weeks, Nancy let herself breathe. Just a little. It was subtle. A flicker. A shift in the air around her. Being underwater for too long and finally breaking the surface, just enough to suck in one sharp, defiant gasp of oxygen. She turned back to her folder, slipped a sticky note onto the latest document, sent to J, 9/47 p.m. baitcast. Brandon would never see it coming, because while he was busy running PowerPoint marathons upstairs, someone just opened the cellar and found the rot. And Nancy? She wasn't alone anymore. Brandon strutted into the Thursday status update like he was walking onto a yacht that wasn't sinking. Fresh haircut, navy jacket, no tie, just the kind of overconfident tech bro business casual that screams I took a LinkedIn course on leadership. Team, he beamed, clapping once like a youth pastor about to drop a PowerPoint. We're on track. Synergy alignments locked, licensing's clean, and legal's 90% through final review. Heading into Friday's acquisition call ahead of schedule. A smattering of polite nods circled the table. The usual suspects, marketing, finance, HR, ops, all played their parts. Legal looked twitchy, but not enough to derail him. And compliance? Well, compliance had been gutted. Brandon waved toward a pie chart, its labels big enough for a kindergarten poster. I want to especially thank Jenna for wrangling the updated asset roll-ups. Huge kudos to Todd for overseeing the IP schema migration. Real heroes. Nancy's name didn't even hover. He continued, we had to streamline some redundant roles during this process to keep things nimble. So yes, some personnel were shifted to back-end support. Nothing personal, just operational necessity. Nothing personal. Nancy watched the live stream from her cubicle downstairs, muted. Her fingers hovered over her keyboard. She wasn't surprised. This was classic Brandon. Polish the turd, paint it gold, then step on anyone who remembered what it smelled like. But what she wasn't expecting was the little twitch in Legal's left eye. Marissa Tran, associate counsel, leaned forward slightly. Brandon, just to clarify, the indemnity carve-outs for Group C licenses, you've reviewed those personally? Brandon didn't flinch. They're covered in the reissued compliance doc. Final version, October 5th, share base folder 12.3. Nancy blinked. October 5th, she opened her offline archive. The document Brandon was referencing didn't exist in any version from that date. The last legitimate version was October 3rd, her version. After that, the edits were ghosted. Someone had wiped the edit trail, re-uploaded a simplified document, and called it final. Marissa hesitated. Okay, I'll flag that for one final review. Brandon gave her that dead-eyed smile, the kind that says flag it all you want. I've already got the CEO's signature. Of course, he purred, happy to circle back if needed. And just like that, the moment passed. But for Nancy, it was enough. She pulled her log sheet out from beneath the folder labeled Audit Ghosts. October 3, final IP compliance draft, Group C indemnity clause intact. October 4, email from Brandon. We need a simplified version. This is too dense. October 5, new upload, missing indemnity clause with metadata wiped. October 6, Marissa's flag. She grabbed a fresh red pen, circled the 5th, drew an arrow to Brandon's email, labeled it escalation trigger. Her timeline was evolving. What started as a backup folder had become a forensic map, a breadcrumb trail from risk to recklessness. She printed Brandon's thank you slide, annotated the name omissions, scribbled duplication equals erasure at the bottom, thought he was wrapping things up, tying bows around problems with buzzwords and optimism. But Nancy knew better. He wasn't ending anything. He was building the case for his own implosion, and she was just here to document it. The cursor blinked like a heartbeat. Nancy sat motionless, staring at the email draft on her screen, every word measured, every clause razor-etched like a scalpel. She wasn't speculating anymore, wasn't suggesting or hinting. This was the kill shot. Subject, Risk Exception Notification Group C licensing/indemnity alignment. She kept it clinical, cold. No emotion, no tone, just citations, dates, policy references. Acquisition Agreement Clause 6.2.4a Indemnity Validity. Clause 7.1.3 Material Misstatement. Attachments A through D, redacted. She ended it with the kind of sentence that sounds harmless if you don't understand the stakes. Given the discrepancies between the October 3rd and October 5th document versions, this may impact the scope of indemnity protections outlined in the acquisition holdback schedule. She sent it to the official compliance inbox, compliance@marotech.org, where theoretically, legal and executive review were piped in. Then, with a calm breath, she added her own personal Gmail to the BCC, just in case it mysteriously vanished. She clicked send, and just like that, 7 years of swallowing her tongue, of being talked over, reassigned, invisible, ended with one email. It took exactly 9 minutes. That's how long it was before Brandon appeared in the doorway to her basement office, breathing like a dog that just lost a fight but still wanted to bark. He didn't knock. He stepped inside, shut the door, stood in front of her desk like he was choosing where to bury the body. You sent what? He asked, voice low, controlled, like he'd rehearsed it. Nancy didn't flinch, an observation about a licensing discrepancy. You flagged me, his mouth twitched. You included legal, you used my edit. Nancy met his eyes. I used the document stored on ShareBase. Don't play cute, you know what you're doing. Yes, she said. For once, I do. He stared at her for a full 10 seconds. Then, you're done here. It wasn't a shout. No dramatics, no slammed fists, just flat ice in his tone. You'll receive an offboarding packet by EOD, effective immediately. No exit interviews, no transition docs. You want a lawyer, call one. He turned, hand already on the door, then paused. You should have stayed in your lane, Nancy, and then he left. She didn't move, didn't cry, didn't breathe, not at first. Her fingers trembled just once, then stilled. He turned slowly back to her screen. Opened a blank document. Timeline Addendum Part Roman 2, October 7, internal memo flagged. Brandon confrontation. Termination issued. She saved it, printed it, slid it into the binder. Then she opened her drawer, took out her key, and locked the folder away. She didn't know what would happen next, whether her email would vanish, whether legal would act, whether Brandon would try to bury her career 6 feet under. One thing was certain. She'd said it. In writing. Logged, time-stamped, archived in multiple formats. Sent to a server they didn't control. The clock was ticking. And Nancy, she was done hiding. Brandon was glowing, not just smug, radiant, like a man who thought he'd finally outrun the evidence. Big day Friday, he said to the intern team as he strutted through the upper floor, coffee in one hand, his other fist casually bouncing off doors like a politician on a victory lap. Full alignment. Calum's team is locked. We're on rails now, people. He winked at Todd from IT, snapped finger guns at HR, and even fake bowed to legal's junior associate. If there was tension in the air, Brandon couldn't smell it over the stench of his own cologne. Downstairs, Nancy was sealing up boxes. Her inbox had stopped buzzing. The Slack channels were silent. IT had already scheduled her device deactivation. And sometime after lunch, received a cheerful HR ticket requesting your assistance in compiling your institutional knowledge into a shareable offboarding document. Translation: strip the copper wire from your own coffin. Nancy didn't mind. The countdown had begun. She labeled her notes carefully. Color-coded sections. Copies of the licensing schema she'd flagged, versions A through D. Snapshots of metadata before and after the October 5th upload. Even a little post-it tucked inside the front folder that read, if found, please forward to legal or the press. But that wasn't the moment that made her stop. That came at 3:12 p.m. Her personal inbox pinged, one new message. From J. Eckhart at Calum Partners. Subject: Legacy Docs, will you be present for Friday's closeout? Final review begins 9 a.m. Just one line, no fluff, no signature. Janelle in pure form. Nancy stared at it, hands hovering. She read it again, then again. Not should you be, not can you join, will you be present, like Janelle already knew, like something was already loaded in the chamber. Nancy typed one sentence in reply. I'll be nearby, no need to explain, no need to ask what Janelle had found or planned. She closed the laptop. That night, Nancy drove to the UPS store and mailed one sealed envelope to herself, priority, signed, timestamped. Inside it, a printed copy of her timeline, her redacted audit trail, and a copy of the original indemnity clause from October 3rd. Just in case. She didn't sleep much. She didn't need to. Let Brandon rehearse his speech. Let him polish his teeth and practice his fake humility for the buyer's CEO. Let him fantasize about becoming chief strategic something under the new umbrella. Let him think it was over, because it almost was. One meeting left. And binder. One email that hadn't disappeared. And Nancy? She wasn't coming to fight. She was coming to watch the match end. The boardroom was all polished chrome and brittle smiles. Brandon stood at the head of the long glass table like he was auditioning for a role he'd already cast himself in, next-gen executive visionary, disruptor-in-chief, the golden boy with just enough stubble to feel dangerous, but still smell like hand sanitizer. First off, he began, sweeping the room with an open-palm gesture he probably practiced in his mirror. Let me thank everyone at Calum for their partnership, patience, and persistence through this integration phase. He was using the voice now, the one that was equal parts TED talk and timeshare pitch. I think we all agree this acquisition isn't just a merger of assets, it's a synergy of values. Our tech, your scale. Our product velocity, your market reach. This is the next era. Across the table, the buyer's CEO, sharp suit, sharper eyes, offered a tight nod. His lawyer didn't blink. The Calum finance lead tapped a Montblanc pen against a notepad without writing anything. And seated halfway down, almost blending into the side paneling, was Janelle. She didn't smile, didn't move, just listened. Brandon continued. Our compliance team, lean as it is, has ensured full document integrity. You'll find the share base access logs in Appendix G. All risk items from 2019 onward have been formally resolved or indemnified, as confirmed by the October 5th compliance cert. There it was, the date, the document, the bluff. Meanwhile, just outside the boardroom, across from a water cooler and a limp ficus, Nancy sat quietly in the hallway. No badge, no access, not even a seat at the table. Her resignation letter was open on her lap. A single paragraph drafted that morning. No bitterness, no accusation. Just the necessary formalities and a handwritten line beneath it in her own looping pen. My silence was never consent. She hadn't signed it. Not yet. Through the frosted glass, she could hear Brandon's voice rising. A joke, laughter, someone clapping politely. Nancy didn't look up. She just waited, like a storm cell listening for thunder. Inside, Brandon leaned forward, confident now. We're ready to close. If legal's satisfied, believe we can finalize escrow and proceed to signature. And then Janelle shifted. Just a little. She placed a slim folder on the table and cleared her throat. One point before we proceed, she said, voice smooth as steel cable. The room stilled. Brandon blinked. Sure, of course. What's the Janelle opened the folder. Inside, 2 printed emails, clipped together with a red tab. One was Nancy's. The other, a reply from a personal Gmail account bearing Brandon's full name, dated October 4th. Before escrow finalization, Janelle continued, we'd like clarification on a licensing discrepancy related to Product Group C, specifically the indemnity exclusions removed in the October 5th compliance certification. Brandon's smile cracked just slightly. I believe that matter's been resolved, he said, a little too fast. We reviewed all relevant clauses, did you? Janelle interrupted, flipping the page. And then the silence, not the awkward kind, the loaded kind. The kind that hums before impact. Outside, Nancy finally looked up from her letter. The fuse was lit. Janelle didn't raise her voice. She didn't have to. The silence in the boardroom made every syllable ring like a fire alarm wrapped in velvet. She lifted the top sheet of paper from her folder, an 8.5x11 printout, crisp, marked only by the red underline she'd drawn across the subject line. Group C, licensing clausal gaps and indemnity exposure, Nancy's email. Dated October 7th, Janelle said calmly, sent from Nancy Care, Risk and Compliance, to the official compliance inbox. She looked around the table once, then began to read. To whom it may concern. During a review of the updated licensing documentation provided in ShareBase on October 5th, I noted a material discrepancy involving the indemnity clause for Product Group C. The version uploaded appears to omit critical language that had been present in all prior drafts. If this clause is not restored or formally disclosed, it may result in a breach of acquisition protections outlined in Clause 6.2.4a of the current agreement. Respectfully submitted for urgent review. She laid the paper down gently. She picked up the second page. Also dated October 7th, she said. Reply sent from Brandon Calloway's personal Gmail account. She let that part sit in the air like a dropped glass, addressed directly to Miss Care. Brandon shifted, not a lot, just a twitch in the jaw, a tiny adjustment of posture, like someone realizing too late that the floor beneath him wasn't solid. Janelle continued. Nancy, you're overthinking this. No one cares what that clause says anymore. The buyer's not going to dig through indemnity footnotes. Just close the file and let it go. The room went dead still. No one coughed. No one moved. Even the HVAC seemed to pause. The lawyer next to the buyer's CEO stopped mid-note. Janelle closed the folder and looked directly at Brandon. Your email, Mr. Calloway, explicitly acknowledges the existence of material indemnity clause and simultaneously confirms its intentional exclusion from submitted documentation. Sent outside of the company's official communication channels and in direct contradiction to legal policy. She didn't blink. Across the table, the buyer's CEO, quiet until now, picked up a pen. Scrawled something onto a yellow legal pad, folded it once, then slid it across to his lawyer. Lawyer opened the note, read it, blinked. Leaning toward his client, he whispered something too low to hear. Nancy, seated just outside, couldn't see the pad, but she saw the shift in the lawyer's spine, the stalling breath. Inside the boardroom, no one spoke. Brandon opened his mouth once, then closed it. The buyer's CEO finally looked up, expression flat, voice colder than the steel in the table legs. Is there anything else we should know? Brandon didn't answer. For the first time in weeks, Nancy smiled. Not because it was over, but because now it had to begin. The buyer's lawyer leaned in, whispered 5 words, and sealed Brandon's fate. "Oh, this kills the escrow." The sentence landed like a steel beam on glass. The buyer's CEO exhaled once, slowly, then turned to the Marrow tech executives with the finality of a man who had just watched a deal curdle in real time. "In light of this," he said, tone clipped, $60 million holdback clause is now void. We will require a full renegotiation of terms, and we will be pausing all operational integration until our legal team completes a secondary audit." Someone gasped. Someone else dropped their pen. Brandon didn't speak. His skin was pale, a thin sweat forming at the line of his collar. He started to gesture, maybe to deny, maybe to spin, but the buyer's CEO raised a single hand. "Don't," he said, not angry, not loud, just done. Then he turned to the Marrow Tech CEO, Brandon's father, stone-faced at the far end of the table. "You buried a material compliance risk," he said, each word a blade. "And your son documented it in writing, off-channel, intentionally. If I find out your executive team knew about this, the deal dies entirely. Is that understood?" The elder Calloway didn't respond. Just stared ahead, lips pressed white. "Effective immediately." Buyer's CEO continued. "Mr. Calloway is to be removed from all acquisition discussions." A security staffer, Calum's, not Marrow Tech's, entered the room with quiet professionalism and moved to Brandon's side. Brandon stood slowly, tried to collect his tablet, but the guard gently shook his head. "Leave it." He looked around the room one last time. No one met his gaze. Then he was gone. Outside, Nancy stood as she heard the door open. Brandon came out first, shoes loud against the tile. When he saw her, he paused. "Nancy." She didn't stop, didn't look at him, didn't even blink. She walked past like he was furniture being moved out of a house she no longer owed rent on. Inside the boardroom, Janelle was already standing. She motioned to the door. "Send her in." Nancy entered calmly. The buyer's CEO looked at her like a man who had finally located the one working smoke alarm in a burning building. "Read your email," he said. "Thank you." She nodded once. "We'd like to offer you a position," he continued. "Compliance lead." Calum sighed. "Full retention bonus. Different culture. Different rules." Nancy didn't smile, but something in her shoulders relaxed. "I'll need it in writing," she said. "Of course," he replied. Later that evening, in her new office, a temporary one, 2 floors up from the basement where she'd spent her final weeks in purgatory, Nancy opened a drawer and slid in the binder. Thick, labeled, filed. The front cover had one line written in black ink: "When they don't listen." She closed the drawer. No fanfare, no applause, just quiet, earned power. And the knowledge that this time they had listened. Too late, but not too late for her. Big thanks, you legends of the old office days. Subscribe to keep the switch-flicking chaos alive. Your ex-boss is shaking in their loafers.